Hey, everybody. Thank you for your patience and waiting. We really appreciate it. Nightlife, we like a line. We like a lot of people coming in and having a good time. My name is Jake Usna. I am the content producer here at the Walker Arts Center. And I'd like to also introduce my co-programmer for the series.
My name's Taylor Jasper. I'm Assistant Curator of Visual Arts here at the Walker Arts Center.
And thank you all for coming to the second in our series of 4 programs, Nightlife as Form, that celebrates queer nightlife as an art form, is specifically focusing on queer nightlife of the Twin Cities and Greater Minnesota. We'd like to start every program here at the Walker by acknowledging that the Walker Arts Center is located on the contemporary, traditional, and ancestral homelands of the Dakota peoples. This site, which was once an expanse of marshland and meadow, holds meeting for the Dakota, Ojibwe, and Indigenous peoples from other Native nations who still live in the community today. Since this is, I mentioned, the second in a series of 4, I'd just like to let you guys know about the other 2 programs, which are also totally free of charge, which is true also of all of our galleries, as well as programming on Thursday nights. It's always free from 5 to 9. So if you haven't had a chance to check out Keith Haring, Artists for Everyone, which is on view till the first week of September, or we just opened the first new reinstallation, rehang of our permanent art collection, This Must Be the Place. Just opened a couple weeks ago. We recommend you come back and see a bunch of really great art, including some wonderful local artists in that show. But on August 1st, we'll be having at 7 p.m. a free film screening looking at the relationship between nightlife and cinema as a place of representation called If You Label Me, You Negate Me. And that'll include a 60mm print of Kenneth Anger's early, Kenneth, I always like to say it was the first American gay movie. I don't know if that's totally traceable and for sure, but it was definitely a really early one that we're very excited that the Kenneth Anger estate has given us permission to show. We'll also be pairing it with a few other shorts, including Lisa Ganser's 2001 documentary, Homocore, Minneapolis, which I do not think has probably been screened in town in at least 15 years, if not more. So we're very excited to be showing that. And then on August 22nd at 6 p.m., we'll be having Linda Simpson present Drag Explosion, which is a one-woman show. If you're unfamiliar with Linda's work, she is kind of a pioneering drag queen who's been working in New York City since the late 70s. And she, amongst really helping pave the way for a lot of other artists' careers and support, is sort of the de facto documentarian of drag and queer nightlife in New York, and has put out several books. But this show will be a one-woman show showing a lot of these behind-the-scenes photographs, everything from like the very first time RuPaul ever played the Pyramid Club to the founding of Wigstock and a lot of other things. And we're very excited to have Linda come back. She's actually from St. Paul. So we're excited to have a hometown person come back. And then that will be paired with free performances by contemporary queer performers that will be taking place after her show. All, again, free. If you haven't gotten one of these little bookmarks when you came in, grab one on the way out. It has all the information about that, as well as other programs and accompanying articles on the Walker Reader, which is our online publishing platform that includes things like the editors of to interviews with Genesis Piorge, to a whole series that accompanies this series of talks and programs looking at nightlife as an art form, but throughout the country and not just centering on the Twin Cities. And then if that wasn't enough, next week, Thursday, we have a lot to promote. We are doing a program called Party for Life that is a partnership with the Aliveness Project, as well as the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence will be here. And at the same time, as part of that, we will be doing a free talk on photography books and looking at that specific translation of a body of work into books. And that includes a book by Wordsworth Mcghazi, who has been documenting local BIPOC immigrant queer families and individuals. And it's a really beautiful book, and we welcome you all to join us for that as well. And so now, I know I've had a lot to mention, but I'd just like to introduce our amazing panel. In no particular order, Shannon Blowtorch is a Twin Cities-based DJ known for her eclectic music collections and her incredible ability to read a crowd to keep the party bumping. City Pages and Star Tribune named her the best club DJ multiple times, and she made the Sun Times Top 100 DJs. Now, Venus de Mars has been a staple of the underground music scene both here in Minneapolis and around the globe for nearly 2 decades. Forming the band All the Pretty Horses in 1994, Venus combined elements of punk, goth, and glam to create a truly unique sound. And Sci-Fi is a DJ and part-time rapper from St. Paul. She's been the creative force behind events like Adventures in Space-Time, Funkathon with co-producer FNK, and the Jersey Shore theme party. Hello? After training under DJ Shannon Blowtorch, she's DJ'd at the Saloon, Lush, and even Paisley Park. And then last but certainly not least, Ed Varga is a San Francisco-based composer, songwriter, sound designer, and owner of Tone Generator Studios. Born in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, he lived in Minneapolis, Madison, New York, Olympia, and Los Angeles, landing in the Bay Area in 2009. He played drums on several punk and indie rock bands, worked as a sound engineer, and as a transgendered man has been an active voice in the queer community. He has produced music and art events and festivals for over 25 years, founding both Homocore Minneapolis in 1995 and Homo Go-Go, Olympia and San Francisco in 2002, and working on iconic events The Transfused, Yo-Yo A Go-Go, and Lady Fest in Olympia, Washington. A graduate of the Berklee College of Music, he studied music composition for film, TV, and video games. He also has a solo songwriter project under the name Eddie and the Heartbeats. So, okay.
All right, hello. Thank you all so much for being here. I thought to start off, each of you could tell us a little bit about how you began to practice and create Nightlife, who your mentors were, and what your entry point into the practice was. And I was thinking we could actually start with Sci-Fi.
Hello. Oh, there we go. Oh, God.
No pressure.
Right? No, actually getting into nightlife, because I've been playing music my whole life, because both my parents were musicians, but actually getting into nightlife was through Shannon. I met Shannon when I was, I think, 18 or 19 years old. I had spent a year working at the Science Museum through AmeriCorps, and it was, I had just started the beginning of that contract. And our first week there, or my first week there under that contract was for an event called Project Me, where they would let the young people in the space talk about themselves, which I thought was really, really cool, but sort of like through a particular lens of whatever topic was selected for the year. And that particular year was all about sort of like queer and trans 101 for all the young people that were in the space. And they would spend the day doing workshops and then process what they learned in the workshops through art. Shannon was brought in as one of the local artists to work with the young people to kind of help them figure out how to process all the new stuff that they were learning. And me, being 18 and freshly dropped out of college, spent a lot of my time in our newly built music studio, not doing my job. So they were like, you spend a lot of time in there, you should give Shannon the rundown and like just let her know what's going on, and so we can figure out what equipment we got to bring and how we're going to work with everybody. And that was very much a place of like the right place, right time situation. And she would wind up like inviting me out to shows and stuff and kind of seeing how I hold myself in crowds. And then one day, just randomly at a drag brunch, like between sets, she would just pull me aside and be like, hey, listen, I think I'm going to bring you on full time. And you'll like learn how to, you'll learn the business. You'll get to learn how to set up all the DJ stuff and learn about the processes of how everything comes together, and just sort of learning how to read a room, and also like at one point learning how to DJ, which is super fun. And has brought me here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we can just maybe continue down the line, or whoever wants to go next.
How did I start? I think I've been in the business since I was 18. I started in bands in Wisconsin. I didn't know you're from Scotty. Moved to Minneapolis, moved here. Honestly, I was a sex worker when I moved here. And kind of got shunned by the queer community a bit. Got a lot of shit for it, or people didn't want to be around me. I saw the Pretty Horses play one day, and, excuse me, but some bitch in the crowd threw a fucking 40 bottle at Venus as soon as she took her top off, and we weren't having it. So I kicked her out of the outdoor festival. Yeah. Do you remember that Bastille Day year?
It would have been 97?
97-ish?
90, yeah, it was before, 97, 96, 97. 96, 97. This works. Why not use a microphone?
So I talked to Venus after the show. I met up with her a couple times, different All the Pretty Horses show, and I said, you need to have me on stage dancing for you. Not asking her. It's like, I'm gonna dance for you, whether you like it or not. And that's how it happened. And then I joined Venus's band, and Venus mentored me. So taught me the music business. Also, I think one of the biggest takeaways I have is learning a shady fucking business while maintaining your morals and values at the same time, which is a fucking hard balance. Because no matter what, it's a shady industry. So what will you tolerate and what can you not? And I think that's a huge takeaway I took away from Venus is maintaining your integrity while doing it. Then from there, I mean, I learned so much, like whether it's like booking, PR, stage management, booking tours, all the shit. And I took that experience and started working with everything, like stage managing events. I did the Flaming Film Festival with Lisa Ganser for years, helping manage that. Lisa Ganser and I revived Homocore Minneapolis, which Ed Varga started. And then I started DJing after I saw Pam the Funkstress play, and still doing it. And also like taking young people in and being like, do you want to learn some shit? What you want to know? So, yeah.
I'm trying to decide how far back to go. I'm trying to tie. When I moved to Minneapolis in '89 and was involved with a lot of activism and organizing on campus and off campus, a lot of political organizing, and then I did an internship in New York in 1994 at the Lesbian History Archives, and started and just was going to a lot of club nights there, and also kind of seeing like a little bit things that were happening culturally that I wished were happening in Minneapolis. And at that time I wasn't sure if I was going to stay in New York or come back home, and I did end up coming back here with this idea of being inspired by some of the things that were going on with Homocore Chicago, which was organized by Joanna Brown and Mark Freitas in Chicago in the 90s. They were putting on shows, and Riot Girl New York was putting on shows, and just feeling being a musician as well who played in punk bands before being an activist, and feeling a missing part of our culture and community of queer punk music, or in outside of like kind of a disco or bar culture, and really wanting that to happen in my hometown, and also knowing that there were all these amazing bands that were just skipping Minneapolis because they didn't have anyone to book a show for them, and just wanting kind of selfishly to have those bands come to my town. There was that part of being a fan, and in terms of it was always a desire to build community out of culture that was married with that. So there was also Homocore shows. Also, we had people do spoken word. We had people do dance performances. We tried to kind of mix it up. for any kind of incorporate all kinds of DIY culture that was happening in the Twin Cities. And yeah, it was just, we also did things that, we didn't have a particular venue, but we really gravitated towards District 202, which was the Queer Youth Center at the time. And that was a really special place to get to do these kind of shows. We were outside of bars. It could be all ages, even though District 202 was 21 and under. They allowed us to do all ages for those nights, and I like putting on music events outside of bars or all ages it is much more of a community cultural experience brought together, and yeah, it was all about community building and that desire to have this community around queer punk music happen in the Twin Cities. And when I moved to Olympia, I got recruited by one of the bands who would come through Minneapolis, The Need, to work on their rock opera, The Transfused, and that really evolved into me starting Homo a Go-Go, which was on average, we did 5 days, 50 bands, hundreds of films, spoken word, visual art, and we put on festivals in 2002, 2004, 2006, and 2009. Three of those were in Olympia. One was in San Francisco. And anyway, that's, again, it just was kind of taking that idea around Homocore Minneapolis of building community out of culture and just doing it on a larger scale and doing it in this festival environment.
So correction, 2000. 2000 is when that show happened, and that's when I met Shannon. I had 96, 97 in my head because that's when I started trying to figure out or untangle what to do and how to build events. Smartest thing I did was to bring Shannon into the band, and she was invaluable to me for that time. So in 96, I couldn't really get anywhere with the band in Minneapolis because people just didn't know what to do with somebody who was trans. So my idea was, well, why not go to New York, the biggest place, and try to do something out there. I got my little group of people at that time to drive out to New York, not knowing anything about how the scene worked out there, and booked in. We did play CBGBs that first time, but we didn't understand that everything was surrounding promoters, and it was a completely failed tour. I never wanted to go back to that city again. It was horrible. But as it turned out, I had got a travel study grant to go out to New York, and that fell through, but I followed through with the trip out there in 97, and hooked up with a friend of mine who is a performance artist, Karen Platt. She used to work here in Minneapolis. And she understood everything that was going on out there. And so one night I went out to find her. She was real way out in Manhattan. We cabbed it back in. And she introduced me to promoters and brought me to the Meow Mix. I met them. I went to Don Hills and Squeezebox, CBGB's, Dean Johnson. Yeah, and just I learned how Mother, and that was another club. And I learned how everything was happening. She explained about the promoters were the thing, not the bands and not the clubs. which was a revelation to me because that wasn't happening in Minneapolis. It was all about the band in Minneapolis, and it just was a paradigm shift for me. So she was the one that convinced me to try to do that in Minneapolis. So when I came back in '97 after that trip, I talked to everybody, met Shannon. But by the time it was 2000, we had started to do our nights, and I started to create act as a promoter, and we started with these fetish nights in 99. I think Fin de Siècle was one. We were counting down to the millennium, and it was like every month or two, and we numbered them. I brought in all these other bands. I organized the night, brought in DJs, brought in VJs. We had kind of a play demonstration places and vendors. I just made it like an amazing event to have to go to. And I had been spending some time in the fetish community already because that was the only place that would accept me as a trans person, and didn't have an issue with that. That was one of the few places I could perform with the band. And it was a different world back then. It took off, and we just made that a thing. And that's what we did in Minneapolis. We put on these events. I started a trans night at the Turf Club when the Turf Club was still an independent club, called the Kitty Cat Shack. And that was purely made for trans people. I know a lot of trans people went there, but everyone was closeted back then. So I was about the only one who was living my trans life in public. But a few people who were brave enough would do that. But lots of people who needed to be in community would come up to me after and tell me how wonderful it was that I was doing that. And that's when I realized that we had been making safe spaces for everybody. I was just trying to be a rock star, you know. But we inadvertently created a community safe space. And that changed, again, my whole motivation for working in music, for working as a promoter, for trying to break through into a major platform because I wanted to change the world, and I needed a platform to change the world, and nobody else was going to do it. Nobody else. I knew a lot of people in the music industry who were trans and were too scared to come out. I thought I could do it.
Thank you all for sharing so much of your journeys and experiences. I was just sort of curious, kind of to maybe build off something you're saying, Venus, for each of you, what is maybe one or a couple of the most like striking things you've seen change over your time working in the arts and nightlife, and even Siren too? I know it's maybe a couple years less, but even the things you've noticed, because even the last few years, things seem to shift very quickly, but just kind of curious what you've been most surprised by, maybe both good and bad.
Yeah, good. The good thing is Laura Jane Grace came out, and that was in 2013. She came out and had a big article in the Rolling Stone. I was extremely jealous. Just to be transparent. But she had already established herself in the above ground music, and with that leverage and the investment that the music industry had already given her, she was able to convince them to continue backing her and to take it on. And in my opinion, that thing changed everything in the music industry and our nightlife and everything, in my opinion.
Even for me specifically. Like, I remember reading that Rolling Stone article the day that it came out, and like, especially like as a young trans punk at the time, like just sitting in bed crying, reading that article, and realizing that, like, I was like, oh my God.
She had the platform.
There's more of me.
I was trying to get to that platform. I never could make it. I never made it. But she had that platform, and she used it. And Shannon introduced me to Laura, and I learned that she was actually a very genuine person, and she invited me to tour a leg of her 2014 tour, which I did, and I saw the effect of that. I saw all ages trans kids and their parents, and it practically brought me to my knees to see this. I did not think I would live to see that. It changed everything. And that's not that long ago. That's 10 years ago.
And for me, like, you said 2014, I was 16. I was newly out at the time. And so, like, getting to read that and see, and then like years later, I got to see her open for Green Day at the XL, which like was so weird because I was one of like a handful of people that I could see that was like deeply excited about this. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I very much agree with that. Like it shifted a lot for me personally as like a young trans person at the time. Especially to see a publication like Rolling Stone magazine writing about trans people at all. Yeah. It was just unbelievable to me. More recently, I found what you said interesting about like being in fetish spaces like being the only place that you could be trans, because like now for me as a trans person, like fetish spaces feel so weird now. They're so like aggressively heterosexual now, and in a way that I think is much more reflective of the way people my age think about the 90s and thinking about like depictions of trans people only being sex workers. And like now in fetish spaces, trans people are only treated like sex workers instead of, you know, like your experience, like being like, this is the only place I can be trans. It's like, this is now a place that I don't want to be trans. It's in fetish space.
So back then, everyone thought I was a sex worker, not just the fetish world. Everyone. And when the film came out, because Venus and Mars came out, the documentary, and that was 2004, and we did the film circuit around the world actually, and traveled, and that was a big boost for the band because we performed in a bunch of places. Shannon was part of that. I would do the Q&A after the thing, and everybody, they couldn't, there's my wife right there. And she would come up because in the film, it follows us. The audience couldn't believe that we were married and that I wasn't working on the side. And my little shtick, what I would do is I would go into the places, and these were big places. We were in Spain, we were in Amsterdam, and I would say, where are your trans people? And people would say, well, you know, they wouldn't know exactly how to say it. And I said, here they are. And I pick up one of the every 2-week newspapers, and it was all in the sex ads in the back. And I'd say, here is your trans people. And I would say, nothing will change until you have trans lawyers and trans CEOs and trans teachers and trans politicians. Here we are. We have all of that.
Maybe Ed and Shannon, the same kind of question is the most striking sort of changes that you've seen happen over the years.
I can speak to my experience as a trans man. And back in the 90s, it was, and I was in the queer dyke community, lesbian community, and it was there were only a couple trans guys here in the Twin Cities, and it was very much not a welcoming space. We were treated as traitors, and yeah, we're treated just as traitors to the lesbian nation, basically, and and that obviously has shifted a great deal. It started to shift probably in the mid 2000s, and obviously for the better. And the other thing that I was thinking about that's changed when I think about, we've talked about doing like Homo Go-Go's. We just passed the 20th anniversary of the first Homo Go-Go, and we've talked about doing like another festival that coincided with the 20th anniversary or the 25th anniversary. And that genre that was queercore in the 90s and early 2000s doesn't feel like it really exists anymore. And there's just so many more queer artists that are in all kinds of genres of music, and so trying to come up with an identity of a festival that's still around that concept has been something we struggled with when we've talked about doing another festival. But yeah, just that idea that there was this time in history where we needed we needed to have queercore. We needed to have something that was that genre that was queer and punk coming together, and lots of different things, lots of things that we needed as queer people. And now we just see queer people everywhere, just like we're talking about. There's trans people everywhere, and yeah.
I think the biggest change that I see is the fucking youth are leading everything, and it's fantastic. And they're not going to put up with the same shit that we had to go through. And I support that 1,000,000%. So let them fucking lead it. And we need to back them.
I guess I'm kind of also curious, because everyone in different ways ran festivals, tours, things like that, which are huge undertakings. How have you balanced doing ambitious projects like that and burnout? Like, how do you do that balance, if it's possible? Because I'm sure there's a lot of folks in the audience who have been involved with making Nightlife, or might be inspired by, and sharing some kind of words of wisdom.
Got a mortgage to pay. I'm just going to deal with it.
I was just saying you don't. You just power through it until the event's done, and then you're like, that fucking sucked. As like somebody who's...
And then you forget and you want to do it again.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm actually like, me and a group of my friends are actually on a break from a festival that we had been doing from the last few years, because like the last one we did, we came out of it and we were like, well, we spent the last 9 months almost murdering one another. So let's not do this for now.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I mean, there would be, if it weren't for burnout, there'd still be a Homo Go-Go probably. We never made any money on that festival. We never had any corporate sponsorship. I never made any money on the Homocore Minneapolis shows. It was all labor of love, giving all the money to the bands, and then basically, the 20, in terms of the Homo a Go-Go, I tried to get some corporate sponsorship. I tried to get make it a sustainable organization, and it was just really challenging. And it was right before crowdfunding started, and I think that might have made a big difference for us in terms of funding the festival. We literally put on all of that stuff I mentioned, 50 bands, hundreds of films, hundreds of other artists, for a pass that didn't cost any more than $65 at the end. And it was more like 50 in the beginning. So so we were just really doing it by the seat of our pants, and it's really stressful. I'm maxing out credit cards and trying to pay all the bills and just hoping we sell enough tickets. And one year we didn't. So yeah, all of that stuff is really hard when you're self-producing things. And I think it's just a problem in this country that art isn't valued, and that self-produced art isn't valued in that way, that we can make it a sustainable thing for all of us to be creating these spaces.
I was going to say, the sustainability part really got me, because the last edition of that festival we ran the whole weekend on a budget of $11,000, which sounds like a lot until you realize that you have to pay every single artist, you have to pay for sound, a lot of the time multiple sound systems, you have to pay for porta potties, you have to pay to everybody to come up to the land and clear all the grounds to get everything ready. Like, $11,000 is really not shit if you're planning a festival.
Well, I never did a festival. That was out of my wheelbox. But I have ADHD, so I just tunneled in. I put the blinders on and I just tunneled in. I sustained it for a long time until my credit cards were at about $100,000 in credit debt, and we separated for a while. I started to realize I needed to pull back on my obsession to be successful. And then Laura came along and saved the day, so I didn't have to do it anymore.
I got two things. First is, the one thing I tell young folks when they're DJing is it's so easy to get burnt out and to just like go into robot mode and play the same shit you always play. If you're appeasing a crowd that didn't see you a few days beforehand, doesn't sound like the most fun gig. But if that's a paying gig, great. But you also need to do gigs for the soul. Because if you're not doing art for yourself too, you're not going to have any fun. You're going to burn out so much quicker. And second, bullshit, Venus, you are successful.
Thank you.
Bullshit.
I guess the next question I have, we feel like the conversation's touched on this a little bit. Safe spaces, bars, certain scenes although being part of the queer community, feels like, at least in Minneapolis, I can say when I was coming up and inspired by Venus and Shannon and Ed and everything that came before, it seemed like a lot of these nightlife parties and shows were always being made because who we were and the kind of work we did was not accepted in the gay bars. And I'm kind of curious if anyone has any thoughts on that, and whether or not people feel like it's gotten any better, or it's gotten better and worse, or how that has evolved or not evolved.
I would love to talk on that as someone who's actively doing it. It's weird because, like, I've been having lots of conversations with like other queer DJs that I know, where we talk about sort of the complex nature of like creating queer spaces, and sort of how, like, for my personal opinion, like, every party that I play, every space that I occupy is inherently queer because I'm there. So like every space that I'm in that's playing should be a safe space for queer people to come into, regardless if I'm playing at Saloon, or if I'm playing at Turf Club, or if I'm playing at some random dive bar one day. Like, because I'm there, you should feel safe to be here. The second thing being, I think, especially with queer bars, they're still very rigid about their concept of how they brand queerness to queer people. And like Saloon, for instance, I love playing there because that sound system rips. I hate playing the crowd there because all they want to hear is pop divas and house music, or some combination of the two. And people there, and in specifically queer design spaces like Lush or Saloon in particular, they look at me super weird when I want to come in and I want to play trap music, or I want to play like a pop punk night, or I wanted to, like, we were talking about this before show where like I did Lovers and Friends at the Saloon, which is great. It's like a 90s 2000s throwback thing, and it was awesome, and it packed out Lush, and it was unbelievable. But they like didn't hit me up to do another one because they weren't willing to take the risk on it, because it was outside of the way that they brand queerness to queer people. So it's really hard trying to do this in spaces that are supposed to be for us, because they don't want to have a more open concept of what we look like.
I feel like a lot of the bars say the right thing because I feel like they have to. So they say the right shit, right? But are they really doing the right thing? And I would just like to say there should be more than 2.5 options for queer bars. It's a soccer queer bar now. It's a half a bar.
When I think back to Homocore Minneapolis days in the 90s, I always had the feeling that, I don't know if anybody remembers Lavender magazine. Sorry if you worked on Lavender magazine. I didn't mean to laugh out loud. I mean, it was an important thing for the community. It's important to have queer. It was important back then to have queer newspapers and stuff. But it was always, I always felt, when I got interviewed I was interviewed by Lavender. I was interviewed by City Pages. I was in the local media for Homocore Minneapolis. But I always felt like, like the mainstream queer world just didn't get the music part, and the straight music world could be fine with the queer part, but the mainstream queer world just couldn't understand why you would want to, why punk rock, why this loud music that's not at a gay club that is, like you were saying, like the branding of queerness of being very narrow. And that was one thing I felt back then.
I didn't try to play in any of the gay clubs. I just wanted to be in rock and roll. So I played on the rock stages, and I just happened to be trans. And that's the way I approached it. But we did have a couple of things where we did some events, bigger ones, and to avoid having to get our own sound system, we would get a place that had a sound system. And the 90s would let us take over the top floor, and we had a couple of 2-3 things there. Were semi-successful and one horribly disastrous one.
I think I worked on one of those with you.
Yeah.
Maybe it was the disastrous one.
And that was I was getting close to getting burned out doing that, because there were so many different rooms. We had multiple stages and miscommunication that Shannon can address if she wants to. She doesn't have to.
The manager spit in my face.
Yeah. This is really bad. Really bad. So we didn't do that after that last one. But yeah, I would say that things probably haven't changed too much since the old days to the new days that Siren is talking about. Yeah.
Well, I think each of you have touched on this a little bit, but it's been really illuminating to hear your kind of learnings and reflections over your careers and practices. So now I'm interested to hear what you can advise or what you might offer to folks willing to enter into this work as well.
Well, for me, I'm scared to death of what's going to happen at the election. I don't know what the world's going to be like. So I'm just going to get right to it and say, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that I lived before I had rights as a trans person. and Shannon was there. And we survived, we managed, we built our own spaces. And what I would say to encourage and to help people forward is to say it can be done. No matter what happens, we're not going anywhere.
I'm like, why? I feel like as a 54-year-old white guy, I probably shouldn't be telling the kids anything about how to do anything. But I think, just that whole spirit, the spirit that this brought me into this world, that spirit of like, this thing isn't happening in our community that I want to see happen. Like what I was talking about with Homocore Minneapolis of this thing isn't happening and I want to make it happen. Well, just then be the person to make it happen. Or you want somebody to make this crazy theater piece and you're like, why does this exist in the world? Then try to find a way to do it. And I know that's easier said than done, but in terms of like capitalism and the expenses that go into that, but I just think if you feel like something is missing in this world, find a way to make it happen.
I think I would say, and this goes to the older generation and the younger generation, like help each other, listen to each other and learn from each other. And for the younger folks wanting to get involved in entertainment, I'd say it's shady as fuck. So talk to some folks that have been in it. Don't lose yourself to it. Don't fucking step on people on the way up. Keep people, good people around you. Keep real people around you that aren't gonna yes all the time. Ask for help. Ask for advice. If somebody isn't willing to give you like free advice or educate you a little bit, like if you're asking about throwing a party or your own event, maybe they're not in your circle. Like they're not at that inner tier, right? But yeah, don't be afraid to ask people for help.
I definitely don't feel like I'm in the place to be giving people advice as someone who's still pretty new to it. Thank you. But I feel like, to your point, like that you brought up at the beginning of the conversation about learning how to be in a shady business and still maintain your personal sense of morals is a big thing. And within that, like, I feel like if you are particularly concerned about being a good person in these kind of shady spaces, like we always tend to worry about like being that person by like asking for something or like daring to do something. Be that person. Be that exact person that you're terrified of being, because it's a lot of the time the only way that you're going to be able to create space is by coming into spaces and being as big as possible. Don't make yourself small for other people, especially in a business like this where they will take full advantage of your willingness to make yourself small. And don't just be handing out guest list spots to niggas that don't care about you. That guest list is me losing money. So if you're, to your point, if you're really about it, if I'm letting you in somewhere for free, that's a big deal. That's my money. So please, like, take take the olive branches that people are willing to extend to you seriously and with a bit of grace, because you'll mess up along the way.
We'd like to turn it over to any questions from the audience. And we have a couple microphones coming down, so if folks don't mind just raising their hand if they have a question. Oh, I see one right there.
Hi, sorry, I don't know anyone's name. I was a little bit late. The DJ on my left, far right of the stage, talking about fetish spaces now being very heteronormative, and also being at the saloon and, oh, what's going on? I'm playing trap music. Why is this not the vibe? If you don't mind me asking, do you feel like that is more relating to your non-whiteness, or is it your non-cisness? That's
Both.
avoiding accept or causing
Blatantly. Yeah, both. Particularly with the saloon, because they brand to what I like to refer to as target corporate gays. And similar to what Shannon said before about like all the language being correct, the presentation is not. Saloon loves to think of themselves as a queer bar, but at the end of the day, if you were to observe anything about their branding or anything about their audience, they're a boy bar, and don't let them tell you any different. And yeah, like it's very much both. Like I think in the way that they market to target corporate gays, it's a lot of like white cis gay men, which is like not inherently bad in of itself. They make me a lot of money, but at the end of the day, like I can't go in there and be a black trans dyke and just be really loud about it, because the gay white men in those spaces don't know how to handle me as I am, which is bullshit, because they love my music.
Oh, I see a hand right there.
Hey y'all. I actually wanted to amplify what you were saying about the saloon. My name is Yasmina, and I actually just started to DJ there, and I feel the same sentiments. I was hoping to come into the space and like be able to have a night centered around like Black sapphic folk, and it just has been quite the opposite. And I like literally earlier today saw a post where it was just like a naked gay white dude on their page, which is like a lot of that. And I'm like, even when I was being brought on into this space, like there was this idea being sold to me that we're going to change how this is, and like we're bringing you on to do that. And I'm like, but that's all that your page is now.
Just like a man.
Exactly. It's just like a bunch of men. So I feel, and also too, I'm like, I hear you with like the music thing. It's like maybe I don't want to play Charlie XCX and I love her. Don't be mad at me. You know, like it's just like it's like, please let me live.
Maybe I don't want to hear the same 6 Ariana Grande songs I've been playing for 5 years.
Right. You know, because like queerness and like queer expression is not a monolith. So it can be really discouraging when you're in a space that is meant for queer people and it's not that. And I also want to just express like gratitude and abundance, y'all, because before I came here, I was feeling extremely frustrated about just my work within Nightlife and like feeling the burnout, feeling the things that y'all were talking about. And I saw your story about tonight and I was like, oh my God, that's right. Like, let me go and get grounded and reminded in why I love this practice. And so thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you to the Walker. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, another question?
Hey, cute folks of the panel. I've also been around for a little while, and I came on Queer Time myself, so I'm late. I missed if anyone got to talk about Pi Bar, though, and when we were talking about bars, I didn't hear if anyone got to talk about, especially Shannon, I suppose, how Pi Bar was different, and was it different? Was doing work there different for any of you on the panel?
Yeah, Pi was different. Yeah, I guess I suppose it was different because I don't know, it wasn't the saloon. I had a music venue. Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of trauma from Pi. It's like straight up running a queer bar like that was not It wasn't great. Without Pi though, I wouldn't be DJing. So, recognition there. Trying to please everybody in the queer community on a weekend night was the biggest shit show I've ever experienced in my life. The one thing everybody had in common was a letter of the alphabet. Not class, not demographic, nothing else. You want to hear fucking Kelly Clarkson? What's a Kelly Clarkson? I didn't even know when that bar opened. Other people wanted to hear rap. Then if you play rap, then I just want to hear Taylor Swift. I want to hear it. Like, you can't please everybody in one space. So yeah, I still have trauma over that fucking bar. And I know that bar meant a lot to a lot of people, and I want to recognize that as well, because there's a lot of people I will still see today that are like, oh my God, going to Pi for that amount of time changed my life, and they got to meet a lot of very important people that are currently in their lives there. I know people that were inspired by people that worked there, that took on careers based on that inspiration. Along with the trauma, it changed my life.
Oh, I see a hand back there.
Actually, I love that question because I've been around almost 50 years in these Twin Cities. And I remember a bunch of bars that I did get to go to, Pi being one of them, Club Metro being one of them. I know, right? We probably crossed paths.
I was a go-go dancer at Club Metro.
I saw you be a go-go dancer at Club Metro. We've been around each other for a long time. I also am just curious. There's bars I never did get to go to. There was I saw on the stuff up here, there was some bars I've never heard of. And then I know there was a place called Ladies Night. And I was curious if any of y'all want to talk about venues that don't exist anymore that were really special and maybe not
I'll
special.
talk about Ladies' Night. That was one of the few places that when I was first coming out and before the band was formed, I came out as trans in 1988. So one of the ways that I was breaking away from the underground support club that my spouse and I became members of, and I wanted to be more public, was to find drag nights. And then you could go I could go as my authentic self, and I could feel safe. But it was scary. I was scared. And Ladies' Night was one of the nights they had one, and I would call and make sure it was okay. And then we would go. And we just got there at the tail end of its existence. We were only there, I think, maybe 3 times before it closed. But I remember it, and I was thankful for it.
There was a bar a very long time ago called Girl Boy Bar that, if anybody knows Jenny Olsen, who's in the film world and used to live in Minneapolis, Jenny asked me to mention it, so I'm glad I had this opportunity. But it didn't exist for very long, but it was in the very early '90s, and it was at the Varsity Theater. I remember it being, but they played a lot of awesome music from early Riot Girl, queercore days, and it was a fun club that didn't last very long.
Hi. There's one response that I was hoping to get a lot of groans out of, just for the love of it, but I miss Honey a lot. I miss Honey so not even that it was specifically a queer bar, but now it is. Now it's jet set kind of. And Honey was such a great venue because despite it being horrifically sweaty and muggy down there, it you started bringing me there for Y2K, which was one of my favorite experiences I've ever had. In particular because you brought me there for my birthday, my 21st birthday, and I was drunk as hell on like champagne or something like that. I was like, I feel bougie. I'm 21 now. And we like went out back so that she could have a cigarette, and then we're just standing there, and she hears some noise in the stairwell and opens the door and was like, get back, like get against the wall. And I was like, all right. And then these two guys just come spilling out of the back door. Like one's like got it, the other guy's like head in his arm. They're like wrestling out of the door. And like 4 other guys and a security guard come spilling out of the back door after that. And this guy is like throwing his friend on top of a car, and they're like taking swings off each other, and all this stuff's going on. And then Shannon leans over to me and she goes, that guy's really good friends. Because if somebody swung off on me like that, we're not talking ever again. You're done for. And I was like, yeah, for your friends to be able to pull you out. He was fighting in the club first and then came outside and was like, I'm sick of y'all. Yeah, he's got some really good friends. But I do miss Honey. I also miss, what was it? Oh, so one more of like a DIY thing that kind of went away as I was coming into Nightlife was Mothership. Which I'm really sad that I didn't get to experience, because it was I came into the nightlife scene just as Mothership ended, which I'm really sad about, because most of the people that I've known in this scene the longest were people who got their start at Mothership, which was just beautiful. And like the first time I started getting into performing was actually in response to the closing of Patrick's Cabaret. Because some like McAllister kids, when Patrick's shut down, started doing like their own DIY version of the cabaret called Open Call. And so I got hit up to do Open Call when at the time I was a rapper. I was 19 and very in love and just writing dorky songs. But yeah, like that was in direct response to venues closing and us trying to like recapture the spirit of those spaces that we were missing now.
I think I wouldn't mind giving a shout out to all the old punk houses and practice spaces. I miss the wonderful names of the punk houses, but also a little shout out to all the Pretty Horses practice space, because a lot of the kind of parties and events that trans people, punkers, goths, everyone, those were the spaces that felt like our bars or our clubs. I see a question right there.
We broke a lot of rules in that warehouse.
Mike, do you have a club you're trying to say, Mike?
Yeah, it's coming right down.
Yeah, because Ed mentioned Jenny Olsen, and you can see it in the flyers that are up above, that it's important to talk about the underground art galleries and studios and theaters. Bedlam Theater was a big part. I know it. I saw all the Pretty Horses at an Art-A-Whirl. Those things are really important. And so I'm just curious. Speedboat was an early one for that, but just curious because I haven't heard about that part of
Emma Center.
all your experiences, and the Emma Center too. Although the Emma Center was a hard one when you were a queer identified band. There's like one person there that was rooting for you, and the rest were like, but what? This isn't about anarchy or whatever. I don't know. Sorry, I'm getting personal, but on the other hand, I will say, then I performed at Patrick's Cabaret, and that person from Emma Center said, that was, when we had the queer bands come, I knew there's a place for me in this, alternative political scene too. So it's important. You don't know who you're influencing, so. But yeah, I just was curious if there's any other art spaces or theater spaces that.
Wasn't Bedlam in the space that for a while was called Studio of the Stars too?
Yes.
It's the same space, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Bedlam was super important in creating space. Whichever fruition of Bedlam it was, whether it's a small space or like the legit space with the rooftop. And then they went to St. Paul in Lower Town. It changed over there, though.
That's how I knew
I feel like Bedlam kind of changed when it went over to St. Paul, not for bad or for good, but like it changed. The West Bank spots, though, I think they created a lot of platforms for people in all sorts of arts, whether it's painting, music, performance, doesn't matter. I felt like Bedlam was always a very safe space.
Well, I think we're just about out of time, but I want to invite all of you, and if there's questions that maybe didn't get asked, we'll be adjourning to the lobby right outside where Mari of Gothis will be DJing for us, and there's a bar, and hopefully the conversation can continue there. Otherwise, I would just like to once again thank our wonderful panel of artists, and thank all of you for coming.